and cut your hose to length from there. Okay, so today I'm going to do an installation on a very common thing that is installed on a lot of these cars, and that's going to be a Mighty Mouse catch can. Now the reason I wanted to do this installation is because the latest version of this catch can that I got, which I ordered from Corvette Performance, is the mild catch can system. Now I've installed a number of catch cans on these types of cars before, all with different LT4 engines, the ZL1, the CTSV, and of course the Corvette Z06, the C7 model. The catch can I got though was a little bit different than previous versions of it I've seen before, and the directions that came with it weren't the same for what the parts I got, and it was a little confusing and it kind of threw me off to exactly what I got. You may think that you got wrong parts or incorrect parts, so I'm going to explain everything as to how to do it. Now it took a little bit of going back and forth as to how to figure this out, and I went back and forth with somebody at Corvette Performance named Devlin, and he was a great help, and we were able to figure all this out. So I'm going to do a little installation video to show you on how to do all this, what parts are included, and where everything goes and how to put it in. Okay, so here's everything that comes in the box. I have it kind of laid out a little bit here. I'm going to explain everything piece by piece. Now I'm going to explain this in the sense of, if you're much more mechanically inclined and you just kind of want to be told as to where these parts go and how they're routed, I'm just going to do a quick overview on how to route it and explain to you how to put it in, so that way if you don't want to watch the whole video and you just need some basic instructions, then you can just go ahead and do it on yourself. But then I'm going to also show you how to actually install the thing. The box is going to come with everything that's included here. The only thing that it doesn't come with is going to be this little kit right here, this GM part number. Now this is part number 12679527. This is a gasket kit for the intake manifold. Now the reason you're doing this, or the reason you want to order this, is because you need these bolts right here. These bolts and these little collars, those are the bolts that hold down the supercharger to the actual engine itself. Now you are technically supposed to replace those bolts every single time you use them. They are torque to yield bolts, so whenever you use them, you do have to replace them. Now some lower mileage cars and things like that, you can get away with reusing them. You just have to be careful. I have had it before where these bolts have snapped, and in which case you got to remove the whole supercharger and hope that it didn't snap inside the cylinder head, and then you could be able to get it out and replace it. So I went ahead and got a new kit because my car has some mileage on it, so I wanted to get some new bolts just in case. So that's going to be the only thing that isn't included, is that kit right there, but I'm going to show you everything else too. Okay, so here's everything else that comes with the kit. The only thing that I've done so far was actually take the catch can and put it together. So the catch can itself, this little filter breather, is going to come separate. All you have to do is just put that on and pop it off. Now this is going to be obviously your main catch can assembly itself here, where everything goes. You got two ports on here that are equivalent to, let's just call them AN fittings at this point. So you have what's pretty much a 6 AN and a 10 AN fitting. So the 10 AN fitting right here, this is going to be your inlet into the can. This is ultimately going to come off the driver's side valve cover. This is going to come off the cover into the can, and then catch can catches the oil vapors, and then it's going to come out right here. So above the sight glass right there, this port, the 6 AN, that's going to be your exit port. So entry port, exit port. This is going to come off onto another hose, and this is going to feed to an oil line, or excuse me, a PCV line that goes to the dry sump oil tank. That's going to come off, and I'm going to show you where that cuts from. So that's going to be that part, and I'll show you how to do this. So this is the actual catch can itself, and I'll set that aside. Now here's a little clamp that comes with it. I have the Corvette Performance expansion tank, the engine bay expansion tank. So this is going to mount right to the tank itself. There's a bracket right onto it, built right in. All tanks come with it regardless, so you don't have to order it special or ask for a special. They all come with it. So this is what's going to mount to. This is going to actually where the can's going to sit. And then you have these two screw holes right here, which is going to be these two or four. You have two bolts and two lock washers that go with it. You're just going to lock it in right there. Then you're going to have this. This is just your little hand, and this little lock washer is going to come separate with it as well too. Just a little hand crank, and that's what's going to go in right there and clamp it down. So that's just how you're going to mount it. So next you have this little port right here. That's going to go hand in hand with this. This is going to be your replacement PCV. Okay, this is just a pass-through. The normal PCV, it comes in here, and there's a port that comes up, and it feeds back into the engine from the supercharger, or to the supercharger.
This has that just blocked off where it's just a straight pass through where it comes out right here. This fitting right here is going to be a 3/8 fitting. It's going to screw in right there, and this is going to replace the PCV valve, so that way it blocks off that port feeding it back into the supercharger. The actual PCV valve, when you take it off, is going to have two O-rings right here and right here that you're going to have to transfer over, and I'll show you how to do that. You are going to have to lift up the supercharger in order to get to this. You can take it all the way off, or you can just lift it up, but I'm just going to lift it up, show you how to do it. It's pretty easy, and that's another reason why I got that other GM kit that I showed you before that has those bolts, because I'm going to replace those bolts. Now, this port right here is going to use your 3/8 hose. You're going to have three hoses that come down here: a 1/4 inch, a 3/8, and a 5/8 inch. Okay, the 3/8 inch hose is going to come off here from once you mount that in, go onto that, and then the other end of this hose is going to feed up onto a PCV line that goes back into the oil dry sump tank, and you're going to cut it and put it in at that point, and again I'll show you where to do it. But this is going to feed off of the line that ultimately is the factory line for the driver's side valve cover. So the driver's side valve cover line comes off, gets cut, and then this gets put in onto the driver's side valve. So this ultimately is feeding from the PCV valve, and the other end of it is going to go in line with the hose on the driver's side valve cover. And this is what I'm talking about, this hose right here, okay? So what you're going to do is remove that, and you're going to get it to about here. Follow that line all the way back, right to about right here, and I'll show you later, and that's where you're going to cut it. You're going to cut it, and then the other end of that hose that feeds down from the PCV in there is going to go onto there, right there, and it's going to ultimately feed back into the dry sump tank. So that hose is going to get cut. Next, you're going to have this hose right here. This is going to be your 5/8 hose. Now again, some of these hoses you are going to have to cut to fit just to get them down. They give you an extra long hose, so that way you have plenty of room to work with. These are not pre-cut, so you are going to have to adjust them. You're going to need this hose with your two right angle fittings that you have in there for the 5/8 hose, okay? And then that's just going to slide on there and slide on the other end as well. Then this end is, or one of the ends, is going to go to the driver's side valve cover, and then this end is going to go to the inlet port of the actual valve cover, of the actual catch can itself. So one side goes to the driver's side valve cover, and the other side is going to go to the inlet port of the catch can. So this 3/8 hose right here, this is going to get cut. Now don't just be tempted to go ahead and cut it in half and use one for one part and one for the other. Run one line first, and then whatever excess you have left over, use that for the other one. So what I'm going to show you what to do is take the one end, it's going to run off the PCV, and then I'm going to cut it to where it goes into the dry sump tank. Then the remainder of that hose is going to get connected to the can. Then you're going to use this fitting right here. This is, we'll call it a 6AN fitting. This is going to go into the outlet portion of the can right there. Then the other end of that hose is going to come off there, and you're going to have the other side of the hose ultimately that comes off, and you're going to use this T connector that they give you, okay? And it's going to go in with the T connector, just like that. And then you're going to find the brake booster line that feeds into near where the throttle body is, right? Pretty much at that area. I'll show you right now in a second. Then you're going to cut that brake booster line and incorporate this T into it, so that way it feeds into the engine that way. Okay, so at that point it's already going through the catch can, so the catch can is doing its purpose, and you're not having oil vapors go back into the engine. But that's where this T fitting and the rest of this hose is going to come into play. Now the rest of what you've got here is this 1/4 inch hose, which is going to be your drain from the catch can itself. So what you want to do with that is it's going to go onto the bottom of the catch can just like that. Connect it. I'm not going to push it all the way in because I still have to install it. And then you're going to feed it all the way down. So the other end of the hose, you're going to use these two fittings. This barb side is going to go into that can itself, or excuse me, into the hose itself, and then you're going to take this, which is the ultimate the drain plug for the catch can. Now this is just, you adjust it hand tight and finger tight. As you turn it, you'll see, you'll open it up, and the little valve opens up, and that's where the drain is going to come out. Let's see if I can get focus right there. That's where the drain is going to come out of. And then when you close it, it goes back down and it seals it off. This just goes into there, and then this just goes into there. and you're going to feed this through to the bottom of the engine somewhere, so that way when it's time for you to do an oil change, all you have to do is open up this little drain, and it's going to drain the actual can itself. The only other things they give you too is just a little clamp, so you can clamp this somewhere. I'll show you where I put it in order to keep everything nice and clean, to route this properly, and that's pretty much it. And of course, the only other thing that you're going to have that comes with it, which everybody loves, is a nice little sticker. This will go onto my collection somewhere, but that's pretty much everything that you have that goes with the actual installation of the can itself. So this hose right here is going to be the hose that you're going to cut, okay? This is feeding back into, right behind the throttle body, feeds back into the actual engine itself, and this goes and it follows back and ultimately goes to the brake booster, okay? When you cut this though, be careful. There is a check valve right down, see if I can get a good picture of it, right down there, right below that hose, okay? Now again, you're not going to have that hose right there because I have the expansion tank installed. So if you have the tank installed, you'll have it. If you don't, it'll be much clearer. You're going to cut it about right here, and I'll show you where to do it, and that's where you're going to put your T in. Your T connector is going to go there to the catch can, which is going to be mounted down here and feed into the actual engine itself right there. So those are going to be all your connections, and I'll show you how to put everything in. So if you're relatively mechanically inclined and you just kind of wanted everything laid out as to how to put it in, that's how it goes and how it puts it in. But for those of you that have never seen it done before, I'm going to actually do the install right now as well. And by the way, of course, for good measure, always remember to disconnect your battery before you do anything, as a good habit of practice for everything. So the first thing I'm going to do, just to make this easier, is I'm going to remove the hood. You don't need to do this, but I'm going to do it just for visual purposes, and it does make working out a lot easier. Now, I know there's a lot of tricks in removing these hoods or whatever, so I just do my little trick. You can see right there I have some masking tape. I put the masking tape and I marked a line on the tape itself with a Sharpie, and there's also another line on the actual hood itself. You can't see it because it's kind of dark and it's black, but just draw a line all the way down onto the hood and onto the masking tape itself. What that does is it gives me a horizontal line with the tape, the edge of the tape, and the line with the Sharpie as a vertical line, and I did it on both sides. So that way, when I go to put the hood back on, I have horizontal and vertical alignment in order to put the hood back on correctly. Let's go ahead and take these 4 bolts off. They're 13 millimeters. The next thing I'm going to do is remove this little duct right here, and it's just 4 7mm bolts. One right here, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so next I'm just going to remove the intake tube, this little tube right here, to get everything off and out of the way. Make it a little easier. Go down here, get that clip, push it down first, then push the little white button, and then pull it up, and it's going to let you take that off a whole lot easier. Don't just try to squeeze it and pull it up, push it down first. Then I'm going to take these 2 clamps off right here. Here and here, they're both 8 millimeters. Okay, next thing to come off is going to be the supercharger belt. Your tensioner for the supercharger belt is going to be right down here. This is a 15 millimeter. So if you're facing the engine like I am right now, it's going to be a 15 millimeter, and you're going to want to turn it counterclockwise to relieve the tension. Pull it, relieve the tension, slip it off this smooth pulley first, and it'll come right off the top, and then that's it. That's all you need. You don't need to take the belt completely off, because then you're just going to have to reroute it. Because remember, all you're doing is lifting the supercharger up a little bit. Okay, next thing to come off is going to be the supercharger lid itself, okay? So this lid, you're going to have all these 10 millimeter bolts that go all the way around. So you got 1, 2, 3, 20 of them. These are all 10 millimeter bolts. I'm going to say go ahead and crack them loose first by hand, and then run them out with an impact. And just go ahead and lift it up. If you need to, there's 2 little pry points on this side, and on that side there's little tabs. You just stick a screwdriver in and just lift it, and it just comes up and right out.
Now you can kind of see in here, obviously I already have a little bit of oil in here, so I'm going to clean all this out as well too, hence the point of the whole catch can going in. Now once you have the cover off too, just go ahead and give this surface a good cleaning. You don't need much to clean it, just some red Scotch-Brite, some shop rags, and a can of brake cleaner should be just fine. Get all the oil out of there too, just to make sure, and obviously just try to put a rag over the covering for the supercharger, because God forbid you drop anything in there. So when you clean all this, clean the whole outside surface and these little 4 ports right here, because those bolts go down right there. So when you take this out, the next thing you're going to want to do is remove these 2 lines that go across right here, just to get them out of the way. Now this is that driver side valve cover line that I told you is going to get cut anyways. So just push down on it, push that tab in, and then pull it up, and it comes right out. And then this down here, this is for the purge solenoid. Again, push in, push the little white tab, and then pull it out. This one is a little bit more, is a lot harder to get to just because of where it is. So it's going to take some finagling, but it does come just right out. And then just move those right out of the way. The purge solenoid is obviously going to be reused, or the purge solenoid valve is obviously going to be reused, but the other one's going to get cut, but we'll get to that later. Next thing you're going to want to do after everything is all cleaned up, which I still have a little bit of cleaning to do, but then you're going to take the supercharger itself up and out. So there's going to be 10 bolts that hold in the supercharger. They're all 10 millimeters right on top. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's this one back here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once you take those 10 bolts, you'll be able to lift this thing up. So what I would say is take these 2 ones out first, because they are the most difficult. Then once you lift it up, just be mindful of all the connectors and wiring harness and everything that you still have connected. So don't yank on it and tug on it too much, because you're going to you might end up breaking something. The only other thing that I would say, go ahead and disconnect anyways, it's going to be this brake booster line, because you're going to have to cut that anyways, and you don't want to get that yanked on either. So get that out of the way. Take these 2 bolts out first, and then the remainder of the bolts right here, and you're just going to kind of prop it up, and you can use something to just kind of sit it up, and I'll show you where to get to that PCV valve. So once you have the lid off, yours is going to look a lot more like this, especially if it's never been touched, and it's going to have this little plate attached to it, and there's these 5 screws that hold it in right here. I had already previously removed this, but this is just something you can do if you want to. Just take these screws out, hold on to them just in case you ever want to put this thing back on, but then this plate just lifts up and right out, and it's just basically a little insulator plate. You take this out and it makes the supercharger whine just a little bit more. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit more. So if that's something you want to do, go ahead and take that out. It's just a little added bonus of something you can do as long as you have this thing off anyways. Now, like I said, those 2 bolts in the back, they're going to be the trickiest to get to. What I found works best to get to them, for the one on the passenger side, I have a long reach flex head ratcheting wrench, or ratchet wrench, and that one really gets to that one pretty well. And then on this side, it's just a 1/4 inch with a shallow socket. This will go in, and again, just pop these 2 out first, because they're going to be the 2 hardest ones to get to. Now when you take these 2 bolts out, just remember, you're not going to be able to pull these all the way up and out, because the bolts are too long to do it. So just get them to the point where they're loose, and then pull them up where you can feel that they're not threaded in anymore. Once you have that, you can go ahead and take all the other ones out and pull this thing kind of up and towards you a little bit to get the bolts out. Pop these out real quick. And then just like the bolts for the cover, go ahead and loosen these and crack them by hand first before you hit them with an impact. Now, when you take out each one of these bolts, make sure when you take it out, the bolt itself comes out, but then with it is also going to be a washer, and then this little collar sleeve. Make sure all 10 of them come out with everything.
So sometimes they like to stay in there. And when you take it out, you're going to have the bolt itself, a washer, and the collar sleeve. So when you do that, just make sure you have all of them on all 10. Okay, now that all 10 of them are out, I have 8 of them completely out, and the 2 loose ones back there. Now all you got to do is grab the supercharger and pull up, and it's already loose, and just move it a little forward to get it to the position where you want it. Okay, so the thing that you are going to get hung up on the most is going to be that map sensor in the back. I already disconnected it, so once you have everything loose, scooch it forward just a little bit, pull that red locking tab back, and then just squeeze and disconnect it. That's going to give you the most trouble because that connection is very short. So definitely disconnect that, but then once you have that off, you should be able to wiggle the supercharger far enough forward where you can get that bolt out and that bolt out over there. And again, don't forget to take out that black plastic collar with it, and as well as the washer. Now once you have the supercharger up, just go ahead and take a block of wood or a big piece of rubber or something, whatever you got. I stuck it right here, and that's going to hold the supercharger up because you're going to need to get to this right here. This is your actual PCV valve, and you can see that little port right there where it goes up. That's where it feeds up into the bottom of the supercharger. The new one that you have that's going to go in there is going to block that off, and it's going to go straight from the valley cover just straight out here, and you're going to route the hose out up this way. Now this you're going to want to get out. So this is going to be a 9/16 hex. A 14 millimeter hex also works, but a 9/16 just works a little better. And the last thing you're going to want to do is strip that, because if you strip that, you're going to have a problem. Now it is going to come out fairly, it should come out fairly easily. As you can see, I'm barely putting any tension on it, and it is just coming right out. And there it is. Now here's the old one compared to the new one. Here's what you're going to have to transfer over. You've got a little O-ring right here, this brown one, and then there's a black one right here. So you're going to have to transfer them over. So very carefully, get underneath them, pull the O-rings out. Don't rip them, and set it aside. Take the brown one off first, and then the black one, obviously. Because once you have the black one off, it's already going to have a little bit of oil on it too, so it's going to make it, you know, easy to put on. If it doesn't have some oil on it, you can put a little dab just to put on a little easily. Slip now the black one on over it, so that way that gets worked onto it first. And then slide the brown one on. And there it is. That's all it's going to look like. Okay, so once you have the O-rings transferred over, you're going to want to go ahead and put in your new PCV bypass in there. You're going to be tempted once this thing is out to go ahead and put that brass piece, that 5/8 fitting in there. Don't do it, because once you have it in, obviously, you're not going to be able to spin this down and thread it in to tighten it to get it into place. So get this in, and then once it's sitting where you want, then you go ahead and install that. You go ahead and tighten it with a 16 millimeter wrench and just work it all the way around. Okay, now eventually you're going to get to a point where it kind of bottoms out about right there. At that point, you're going to want to work it back a little bit, because obviously that's not going to do you any good. You need it pointed the other way. So get it to the point where you work it back, point it at about just above the 9 o'clock position, about right there. You want it right there because that's going to be your best routing for the hose. So now once that's in place, go ahead and get your 5/8 fitting. I put some Teflon tape on it, and you're going to want to thread it into there. Hold it in place with the 16, and then get it started and get it into place. And once you have it started in place, I want to tighten that down with a 9/16. Okay, now once that's there, I'm going to point it down a little bit because that's how I'm going to route my hose. Okay, take your 5/8 inch hose, slip it onto the barb. You're not going to really need a clamp there. If you want to put a clamp there for good measure, by all means go right ahead, but you really don't need one. It holds it on just fine. Now I haven't cut the hose at all either. I've left it all right here because I'm going to go ahead and figure out how much I need and then cut it afterwards. Once that's in, I'm going to put this, now it's time I can drop the supercharger back into place. So I'm going to lift this up, take that block of wood out, but you have to be mindful of a couple things. Number one, you got to line up that port right there for the PCV that's now blocked off, and there's also dowel pins. You can see one right here. There, let me let it focus for you a little bit, and then there's one on the other side as well too. So all three of those things need to sit back into place before it goes back down. Now before you set this thing completely down too, don't forget to put your 2 bolts all the way in the back of the supercharger, because you're not going to be able to slip those in once this thing is back and sitting in position. Now there are 8 individual gaskets on the supercharger itself that go underneath, one for each port on both sides. GM does recommend that you replace those as long as you have it up. I've heard of plenty of people doing it without having a problem and not replacing them, but if you're going to replace them, by all means go right ahead. They are in the kit anyways. But otherwise, you want to take these 2 bolts out of that kit that's going to come with it. And again, make sure all 10 of your bolts look exactly the same. They're this long length, they have some thread locker on the end of it, and they have that black collar, and there's a washer on there too. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to focus. But there's a washer there, okay? Make sure all 10 of them have that. Then, you're going to wiggle the supercharger up, take your wooden block out or whatever you use to prop it up. Okay. Now, pull it a little bit forward so you can slide in the 2 bolts that go in the rear. Make sure you don't crush your map harness in the back. It is going to take a little bit of finagling for you to do all this, because once one thing moves, the other one's going to want to sit in. But once you have it, then you just slide it back equally on both sides until you kind of feel it sit into place. And there it went. It kind of just went and sat and down into place. And just check these 2 bolts in the rear. They should both still be loose, which they are. You don't want them to thread in. And then just double check to make sure it's flush on both sides. Once you have it sitting in place and you have all the bolts in, just take the bolts and just run them in a little bit, just to the point where the threads catch. Don't put them all the way down yet. Just get the threads to catch on each one of them, so that way you know that it's sitting in the engine correctly. Now there is a torque sequence when you tighten this down. I'll put a picture of it up on the screen, so that way you know the order of doing it. So follow the torque sequence. What I'll do is just tighten all these down to the point where they're just kind of flush first and not torqued. Then just follow the torque sequence and do a first pass torque at 89 inch-pounds. Once you do the first pass torque, go ahead and do another pass torquing them again to 89 inch-pounds. You're going to do 2 passes, both at 89 inch-pounds. So run them down to the point where they're flush, then 1 pass with 89 inch-pounds,
and then a second pass with 89 inch-pounds, and you're good to go. Okay, and once that's all back in, don't forget to reconnect your map sensor. Okay, so next the belt's going to get reinstalled, but before you put the belt back in, route your hose first. Now the way I did it here is, you can see, it's all the way back there, it's on that brass plug, feeding in there. Go in front of those two sensors and route it back up through that valley right in there, okay? There's going to be plenty of room for you to do it. And once it comes out, it's going to come out right here on the side. There's going to be plenty of room for you to do it. I would say put it back there, because otherwise you don't want it hitting the belt or routing anywhere else, and that's going to be the best place for it. Okay, next you're going to put the supercharger belt back on. So again, just a 15 millimeter counterclockwise tension, and get it onto that smooth pulley, and you're on. Put the cover on in place, and you're going to put all the bolts back in. There is a particular order and torque sequence, and again, I'll put the picture up on there. But again, I forgot to mention this before, but take note of this. This cover has these little black collars that go in each bolt hole as well. Make sure that each one of them has a black collar before you put it on. Okay, so here's the bolt pattern that you're going to want to go ahead and tighten down the lid for. Now, again, those bolts are reusable. Just tighten them down to one point where they're flush, and then do one pass at 89 inch-pounds. But if you'll notice when you do all these 20 bolts, it's labeled down here where you got, this one is labeled 19, and whoops, this one is also labeled 19 up there, okay? So it's a little bit it's mislabeled the way they did it. So this one down here in the bottom left, this one, I use that as number 18. So it'll be 17, 18, 19, and then 20. Okay, now once you have the lid back on, put all the bolts back in. All of these will go back in same way. Don't worry, they're all the same bolt, they're all the same length. So don't worry about mixing them up or anything like that. Now those are going to have a torque sequence as well. So when you tighten these down, I'll put the torque sequence up on the screen. It's going to be 89 inch-pounds again, but it's just going to be one pass. So what I like to do is I'll go around one pass and just get them all flush, and then I'll go around and do the 89 inch-pounds pass. Now at this point too, don't forget to plug back in, put these little clips back into place that you took out before just to get it there. And also on this side too. And if you disconnected that number 8 coil pack to get that one bolt in the back that's a real pain to get to, make sure you reconnect that coil pack as well. Otherwise you're going to have a misfire and other problems. So click all that back in and put all your clips back into place. Okay, then at that point, get these lines kind of back into place, just an idea as to where they are, or so where they would go normally. Once you have this line back into place, this is the one that goes into the driver's side valve cover. Take the hose and give yourself just a little bit of slack, a little bit of room, so that way it's not, too much tension on it. And line it up to about right here on this clip. That's about where you're going to want to make the cut and have it flush up against there. Now this part right here, this hose, the factory one, you're going to want to go ahead and cut it about right here, about an inch in from where that clip is. There's a bend right here, pretty much. Go ahead and cut it a little bit in this way right here from where that bend is, just a little bit, so that way you have enough to cover this whole section of the hose. So go ahead and cut this hose right here and cut the PCV hose from the kit off right there. And then this piece from the factory gets discarded. Now this, at this point, all you have to do is just slip it right on, and that's going to sit just like that. And then reroute and put in your PCV. You might have to tuck it down underneath to give it the slack that it needs to reach over. Reconnect your per solenoid, Click that back in, and then this will just go right there. Now what I'm going to do, just for good measure too, is I'm going to take some heat shrink that I have, stick it over that, put it over there, and then just heat shrink it down just to really seal it. Just so that way I know it's all good, and it kind of looks a little bit better too. And then once you have the heat shrink in, this is the line coming off the valley. Goes in there, and you'll follow that line. It goes all the way back down there, and it feeds down into the dry sump tank. So that takes care of that port right there. Now, what you have to do is do the driver's side valve cover and the brake booster line right here. So now the next step you're going to want to do is actually mount the can. Put the bracket in, put the can in, and you're going to assemble one of the hoses as well too. Now the reason you want to mount the can is that way you have a point of reference for where you have to put all the rest of your hoses and how to cut them to length. Now again, if you happen to have the cordless tank, this is where you're going to mount it on this little bracket down here. It's pretty obvious. If you don't have this cordless tank, then you're going to have another bracket that goes back here. So what you do is you take this, and the way that it opens just like that, put this clip that closes towards the front of the vehicle, and you're going to want to grab your two bolts right here that come with it. These are both 11mm bolts. So it is going to be a little bit difficult with the tank already being mounted, but you can unmount it and do it that way if you want to put it. Now if you happen to have this tank, I would just say do yourself a favor and just loosen the tank just like how I did and put the bolts in this way, otherwise you're just going to struggle. So just loosen the two bolts that hold it in. There's a 10mm and an 8mm, and then just get the bolts in from behind. Otherwise it's just going to be a huge pain. It's just much easier this way. Okay, so now that the bracket is mounted, what I did was I'm going to slide the tank in right there, and I'm going to position it how I want it. Okay, so now this I'm going to want to have towards the driver's side, and this obviously has to feed in there. So it's going to kind of have to sit like that a little bit. So it's going to loop around a little bit. Now, as far as the drain hose for it goes, what I did was I just put this all together right here, just like that. Slid it on. Don't be afraid to heat this hose up a little bit, or maybe even put like a dab of oil on the end here so you can slip the hose on. Put this fitting on and then tighten this down. And obviously make sure the drain is closed. So when it's pushed all the way in like that, it's open. Run it all the way out till it's closed. So then what I'm going to do is, what I would say is, take this and just loosely put it on the end right here. Don't push it all the way on. Then just feed it down, and there's a general idea as to where you think you want it to go. So that way later on, when you take a look at it from underneath, you can see how you want it, and then you can cut this hose to length and you're not fighting to get it off. So then just go ahead and mount it. So take one side of the hose and press it all the way into that fitting as it goes in first, okay? Because you can always just cut one side of it. Again, don't be afraid to heat this thing up to really work it on there. You want it all the way to the edge. Then pop that in, run it through exactly how you want it, and mock up the other fitting, or just put it in place on top of the valve cover as to where you want it. Then line up the hoses to where you think it's going to fit, and mark your hose right there, and then cut it and fit that into place as well.
So to make this a little easier on yourself rather than trying to work it in a car, I just went ahead and took this out. The only thing you got to do to disconnect it is this little tab which goes right behind the throttle body. And then if you follow it down, it's just this little thing. This goes into the, it's an auxiliary brake booster. It's basically there for the hill hold. So if you're on an incline, it applies the brakes. And then this just goes back into the actual brake booster itself. Just pulls right out. When you pull it out, you're going to hear a lot of air and a lot of vacuum leak out. So just remember, when you first start your car back up, you got to pump the brakes a little bit to build up that pressure. And you also have an electrical connector there. It's just a 2-pin. Slide the gray safety lock back, squeeze and pull it out, then you have it. So what you're going to want to do here is cut the hose right here. Heat this part up and heat this part up with a heat gun to get this section of hose off. Make sure you leave the check valve in. Do not take this out of the system. You need it. Okay? So once you do that, I'm going to take this hose off right here, put the T connector in, and then have the remaining pieces of hose connect there and there to make it all one big piece. So
now at this point, take the other piece that you had, the factory hose, and reinstall it into the car, just again so you have some reference to where to cut and put everything. So push it back into the brake booster here, plug back in your electrical connector, and pop it back into the auxiliary booster. Then run it underneath, and then you've got your port right here after the check valve for it to go ahead and connect it. So then, once you have it there, go ahead and take this piece, because it's going to line up right in here. Okay. And you're going to want to heat that up to press it on. And then once you have that in, just figure out a good piece of length of hose that you're going to need to go from here to here, and then that's it. Okay, so all said and done, here's how it looks. Okay, so ultimately, remember, we got the one PCV coming off the valley cover, coming off of there, going up there, and it feeds into that line that goes back into the dry sump tank. I just kind of wrapped it up with some Tessa tape and some heat shrink just to try to make it look nice and have it be good quality seal and everything too. Then as far as the catch can itself, here's the big line going in. This is coming off a valve cover. Just feeds down that way, and it comes in right from the valve cover right there, venting from the engine. Then from the catch can itself too, you have the the exit port coming off the exit port, and it just tees into that brake booster line. Now what I ended up doing was I ended up just cutting that line. I ended up using both the factory upper and lower piece because it already has that kind of curve to it, so that it went right back into the check valve pretty well. You heat those up and wiggle them around, it'll do just fine, and you'll get them in. And again, I just wrapped them with a little bit of Tessa tape, just really more for appearance purposes, because when you heat up these plastic pieces, sometimes they have a little bit of a tendency to warp a little bit. So I just wrapped it up for that, just for good measure too. So, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how it's gonna go. Don't forget to re-plug in your line for that. Make sure all your other connections are good. And then all your other connections for the actual tank itself are good. The only other things that you gotta put back in is obviously the air intake. Put down your two 8mm clamps, and then re-plug back in this line that goes from the dry sump tank. So once you have all that, and obviously put the hood back in. Okay, so here's what the drain hose is gonna look like when it's routed underneath. You can see I just put it into the bottom of the catch can right there and just brought it straight down and zip tied it to this intercooler hose to make it keep it out of the way. And remember, make sure you have the drain or the nut. If it's all the way in, that means the drain is open. If it's all the way out like that, that means it's closed. Obviously only open it when you're getting ready to drain it, but that's how I did it from underneath. You are gonna have some extra parts left over. There is going to be a decent amount of hose that you have left over, little bits and pieces and things like that. And I actually didn't end up using this clamp. If you want to use a clamp for that drain line, you can. It's just something that you know, you may or may not end up using. This is the only factory piece that you're going to have left over. If you want to hang on to it just for good measure, because who knows. And that's about it. Other than that, that's pretty much the entire installation on it. Don't forget to re-pump up your brakes and reconnect your battery as well too. And that's about it. So anyways, I hope this helps. Good luck.